Okay, so Charles Mittelstadt. I haven't had him on in a long time, but I love him as my guest. He is with the Mittelstadt firm. He does all sorts of criminal defense investigating and consulting. You can find him at Defense Mind. This guy, my man Charles, he does it all. He's been involved in government stuff, massive investigations with regard to very high-profile clients, helping defense attorneys. He is a regular TV commentary from Court TV, Oxygen, Dateline, NBC, HLN, CNN. He has been all across the spectrum. But moreover, I know from having spoken to him that Charles is the real deal. Charles, thanks for coming on the show.
I always love your rundowns. You're taking a actually relatively factually complicated case, and you do such a beautiful job on the rundown to sort of simplify it for our guests here. So this is actually a really, really interesting case. I'm anxious to talk about it.
All right, thanks, Charles. Thanks for that compliment. And that's why I like it, because you're a real pro, and I love dealing with pros. So give me your initial thoughts real quick. We got about 45 seconds. Can you tell me what your initial thoughts are if you were coming in and consulting on this case, you know, where you would be with regard to this, you know, he said, she said, basically finger-pointing scenario. That, by the way, happens to be the guy initially, that's the boyfriend initially having been arrested. That was direct examination.
Well, if I came into this case, I would immediately try to wrap my arms around the mountain of, this is one of these rare cases, Bob, where you literally have virtually every form of evidence. You have scientific evidence, you have testimonial evidence, circumstantial, forensic. I mean, everything is in this case. You have a ton of digital evidence. So this is a very rare instance where you get to pull together all of these different forms of evidence, and the analysis becomes relatively complicated. And I think that's the challenge of this case, both for the state and for the defense.
You know, Charles, I was going to say that very same thing when you were going through that rundown. We're on the other end. At some point in time, I want to talk to you about what do you do to assist when you have so much evidence, because it becomes so unwieldy that the manner of presentation, you just can't put it all in, and it may overwhelm the jury. So it's a really, really good point you bring up. We're definitely going to talk about it. We're going to go to a break, and I'll be back on the other end with Charles as we break down this fascinating case.
Was a little queasy. I don't know. I didn't feel that great and needed to kind of lay down again. And Dylan was, you know, a little tired and cranky. And
at some point, did you find your phone?
Yes, I did.
When was that? Do you know?
We had taken a nap on the love seat. I remember laying there with Dylan on my shoulder, and I was watching a Brewer game and some other movie, and fell asleep there with Dylan on me, and then woke up after that point, and it was some point after 2 o'clock, I believe it was. I wasn't really looking at the time, but I think it was in the early afternoon. And I'm like, oh, here's my phone in my bed. I was just under the sheets.
By the time you then found your phone in your bed, you kind of up and about, getting going a little bit there?
Yep. And then I was really getting concerned at that point, you know, and then I tried contacting Nikki and everybody that at that point, making calls and texts.
Again, who are you contacting then once you get your phone in order to try to get things rolling to find Nikki?
I contacted Greg, my parents, I contacted Dallas, and then we did, wondered if, I think Dallas had mentioned if she was in jail, checked the jail records, did an inmate search to see if she was possibly in jail, and then asked Heather to ask her mom if she could call the hospitals to see if she was at the hospital or anything like that, and I said something I wouldn't be able to call for HIPAA rights, and that her parents should, and called my parents and said, you know, I don't have my car here, and I had told Greg to come over to give me a ride to my car, and said, we gotta, you know, try and find Nikki here. And
did you make attempts to contact Nikki directly as well during that point in time?
Yeah, I believe I sent her a text, and maybe, I think, tried calling her, and her phone was still off, and went directly to voicemail.
Okay, so what you hear DJ saying is that he was concerned. She wasn't around. He was calling family and friends and mom and hospitals and jail facilities trying to look for her, which would be something that would be consistent for somebody who couldn't find a person. But this segment that we're doing today is defendants that do themselves in. And in this particular case, George Burch decided that he was going to take the witness stand to support the defense's theory that, hey, I had nothing to do with it. The cops had it right when they arrested him, the guy who you just saw testifying, Douglas Dietrich, not me. Did it work? Let's take a look.
And you said the bartender, I think you said her name was Brandy, had your drink ready when you got there?
Yes, sir.
And what did you say your drink was again?
Jack and Coke.
So you were drinking on this night?
Yes, sir.
Did you go alone to
Yes, sir.
At some point when you were there, did you end up meeting someone who you now know is Nicole Vanderheiden?
Yes, sir.
Tell us more about that.
I was in the bar area, went out before, had a cigarette, came back and standing there, and I don't know if I was watching TV or what it was, or talking amongst friends around me, but I noticed there was a fairly attractive blonde woman standing next to me.
Okay, so you noticed her and started talking to her?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember? Do you remember if you approached her, if she approached you? I guess kind of describe for us as best as you can.
I just leaned to the side and saw that she was standing, and she didn't seem to be with anybody. She was by herself, and I just kind of struck up a conversation. She was right in the vicinity, right next to me.
Did you see her walk in with anybody?
No.
Did you see her walk in?
I don't remember her walking, her coming in or where she came in, because she could come in through the front or the back, and I just remember looking over, and she was standing close to my area at the bar.
And you don't remember seeing her before that?
No, sir.
You struck up a conversation?
Yes, sir.
What kind of stuff were you guys talking about?
First started, she said that didn't sound like I was from here. I don't see myself as having an accent, but a lot of people do. And she just asked me where I was from, and started from there. Just talked about in general how I'd moved here and everything. Talked about my past, or just in general, tell her things about myself, trying to get to know each other.
At any point when you were talking with her, did anybody arrive that seemed to be with her?
No. We sat there and talked for a while.
Did you guys talk about relationships?
We both expressed that we had been through marriages. I told her I had kids. She told me she had kids from marriages. She was, I don't remember if she said separated or divorced. I told her that I was going through the current situation myself.
Okay, so Charles, what are you thinking about this idea that you have Doug Dietrich that gets on the stand, who was initially charged with this offense, gets up there and gives some pretty straightforward testimony there, and now we have Burch taking the stand, which is always a very reckless thing, because as my old bosses used to say when I was a baby prosecutor, juries love to convict defendants out of their mouths. So you got this little juxtaposition going there. How are you advising the defense to go about the cross-examination of this guy based on the other evidence in the case?
Well, but for the premature arrest, an ill-fated arrest of Doug Dietrich, I mean, this defense would be vastly different, right? They really wouldn't have a lot to work with based upon the body of the other evidence that exists in this case. So they really sort of gave Burch this opportunity, and really the only viable defense that he would have would be to point the finger at Dietrich. So, in terms of the testimony, or Burch's testimony, it's as you and I have talked about this before, Bob. I mean, that's always, it's always a dangerous thing. When a defendant testifies, they're basically throwing out all the good work, all the good lawyering that's been done, and it ultimately is going to come down to whether the jury believes them or not. And they'll either exculpate themselves, acquit themselves, or they're going to convict themselves. In this case, it seems like Dietrich appeared to be a very credible witness. And I also question whether the defense would have even, how much they would have even looked into Dietrich had it not been for his arrest. Would they have had his the text messages? A lot of this evidence may not have even existed but for that arrest. So the law enforcement certainly did not make things easy on the prosecution in this case.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Charles, there could be a very good point there if I were defending Burch to say, hey, I got the ready-made summation already by pointing the finger at Dietrich and saying, you know, which version are you going to believe? It's like a Chinese menu, these guys here. Option A, option B, or maybe it's even option C, Keystone Cop kind of thing. But when you get on the stand, that could be a different story, as you've indicated. And you pointed out, perhaps prophetically or presciently, that there's going to be a pointing of a finger, that it's him that did it, not me. Let's take a look at this next clip.
What about your clothes? What are you wearing at this point?
I still have my tank top on, undershirt, and my pants are down around my ankle area.
Again, I don't want to belabor the point or get into too much detail, but would you describe this as, I guess, gentle intercourse?
No, sir.
Do you remember whether or not you ejaculated?
No, sir, I didn't.
When you were having intercourse with Nicole in the, I guess, positions that you've been describing, remind us again, was your head in the vehicle or outside the vehicle?
Little, depending on what was going on at the time, it was in somewhat for a little bit, and it was outside also, because that was the main reason for pulling her to the edge, because it was hard to get up in the vehicle at the same time. So that's why I pulled her to the edge, and I was holding on to her legs while I was outside the vehicle.
When you were pulling up your pants, did you immediately look behind you, or I guess what caused you to look behind you?
I felt something behind me, something kind of, I wouldn't say hit me, but nudged me and made me aware that I was not the only person there.
And you were still kind of gathering your senses at this point?
Yes, sir. It was kind of, I don't want to say groggy, but kind of hazy, I guess, a little bit, kind of still at the point where I don't know what's going on. Like I don't know the environment. I don't know how I get to this point. I don't just naturally wake up with my pants around my ankles normally.
Did you hear anything?
The first thing I heard was, don't even fucking think about it. It's the first things I ever heard, the first words I heard.
What'd you do when you heard those words?
Kind of, I didn't know what to do. Kind of stilled for a second, and that's the main part when I definitely noticed that, like I said, there's someone standing right behind me. Kind of tried to gather myself together as much as I possibly could.
Did you turn around at that point?
Somewhat. I looked like over my shoulder.
Okay, so Charles, here he goes. George Burch is now testifying. This is what this is about. Defendants who take the stand. He's indicating of drinking or sex, they had intercourse. He wakes up on the grass. He's got no memory in between. His pants are at his ankles. He's trying to get his bearings, unfamiliar surroundings. So far, I mean, what do you think of the testimony?
Well, as you would assume, the jury is going to be seizing upon every little detail, right? They've teed up a defense that requires his testimony, right? He can't mount this defense without testifying because he's the only one who can offer up these details. So you would assume that he and his defense team have been over his testimony and prepared for it ad nauseum. They've gone through this scenario over and over and over, fleshing out all the details and trying to anticipate how this is going to be received by the jury and what sort of questions this may spark in their mind. I mean, immediately when I'm listening to it, the thoughts that come to my mind are he hasn't even turned around. I mean, here's a 6'5", 6'7", 280-pound man who's been knocked out, presumably from a blow to the head. He's saying he's a little groggy. He hasn't even engaged with somebody behind him, and they're already telling him, hey, don't even think about it, sort of thing. If Dietrich is presumably armed, it wouldn't seem necessary for him to issue that sort of warning until he would have perceived Burch to be mounting some sort of threat to him, right? And that would be the sort of thing that would trigger that type of statement. So I think those are the sorts of details that the jury would be seizing upon, and those are the sorts of things that you want to flesh out. I mean, in a perfect world, if this was a well-funded case, you would want to do a focus group or mock jury to see how that sort of testimony is received. I doubt they had the luxury of that in this case.
Right. And, you know, like you said before, there's other evidence in this case, and that is where usually the defense's direct examination is going to fall apart because they've got a story, and it's very easy to tell the story from A to B to C to D until the prosecutor starts coming in when it's not scripted any longer, and many defendants fall apart. We got to go to break. We'll be back on the other end. Please stay with us. Okay, so Charles, what he's basically doing is saying that he was being given order by Dietrich what he's going to do here. I can't say. I mean, he makes a good witness. He comes across okay. There's going to be a lot of evidence to contradict him, certainly. Where would you think is the number one piece of evidence, either forensically or otherwise, that if you were the prosecutor, you would be the heart in the knife in the heart of this story?
Well, I think the speed. First of all, he's got her blood, or she has his blood on him. I'm sorry, his blood on her. So I mean that is probably the most connective thing that we have in this case. But you know, if you back off of that and you look at the plausibility of this, and you look at the boyfriend's actions, I mean, whenever you have murders like this that involve some intimate, it's rare that the intimate reports them and actually takes proactive actions to try to find, to reach out, locate their loved one this quickly. Mm-hmm. And then you have these text messages that really more accurately characterize, even though the defense is trying to say, hey, there was some sort of acrimony, it really doesn't. It doesn't come across that way.
It doesn't come across well. Listen, great. Absolutely, Charles, I agree with you. We got to take a real quick break. We'll be right back. Today on the Law&Crime Network, defendants that dare to take the witness stand. We got Burch on the stand. We're going to listen to one more clip because I don't think he's doing himself any favors.
Part of your not gentle sexual activity that you had with her, right?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
That was all a result of your not gentle sexual activity that you had with her?
If that's the way you would put it, yes, sir.
I think that's the way you put it.
It wasn't gentle, no.
It was painful.
That I don't know.
Painful because it wasn't consensual, right?
No, sir, that's not true.
What really happened was you drove Nicole home 20 miles away from where you lived, fully expecting that you were going to have sex, right? That was your expectation. You were going to have sex. That's why you're driving her home, right?
I was hoping that we would. It was leading from what had happened before and where we had spoken. It seemed like that's what was going to happen.
And when you get there, and it becomes clear that Nikki isn't going to have sex with you, when she attempts to go into her house and leave your vehicle, that's when your mood changes, right?
No, sir.
That's when things get aggressive, don't they?
Not at all.
That's when you grab that cord and strangle her, don't you?
No, sir, not at all.
That's when Nikki gets slammed on the ground repeatedly when she's trying to run toward her house, when those bloodstains leave.
Charles Mittelstadt, criminal investigator extraordinaire, Offline, you said you had one question, which I think was an amazing question. Common sense always rules the day at trials. What was it?
Well, I think the jury's going to be left with a question. Why does Dietrich let him live to tell this tale?
Exactly.
Why wouldn't he have angst towards both of them?
And I think it is a common sense question like that, Charles, that actually wins the day for trials, whether it's stated, which of course you hope it would be, or whether one of the 12 jurors in that jury room asked that very same question. Charles, you're the man. That's why you're with us. I know that we've only had a short time together, Charles. I want to thank you, but you should know, I don't want you before you leave, that there was in fact a verdict in the case, and it may shock you. The verdict in that case was guilty. And
wow.
Wow, what a shocker. And again, another defendant, 3 in a row, took the stand and sent themselves down to the train of state prison. He is getting a murder first degree, life without parole. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Law and Crime Network. We're covering these cases gavel to gavel. I'm going to ask you for a favor for all those fans out there of what we do here. Please go on the lawandcrime.com website. Find all the streaming platforms we're on. I never used one of those streaming platforms, but now I get it 24/7 on my phone from multiple apps. It's a Dan Abrams production. Our hosts are awesome. Our guests are awesome. We're the only ones that do it this way. My name is Bob Bianchi. If you want to find me, you can find me at rbianchi, BIANCHIESQ on Twitter, or join me on Bianchi Law Talk on YouTube. I'll see you next week.